palavra agora, por favor, Rajendra.
Thank you very much. Let me at the outset express my gratitude to UNITAR and the Ethos Institute for this extremely timely opportunity to discuss social contract. And I'm particularly happy that you organized this the day after this major conference, because this is a time for stock taking. This is a time to see how the social contract, which perhaps has been a bit elusive, can now be built on the basis of what we have before us. Dr. Archim Steiner and I didn't quite rehearse what we were going to say, but what he said clearly gives me an entry into what I was going to say. And this is essentially in the field of knowledge. And I think what Dr. Steiner said is absolutely right. In multilateral negotiations, we have become like chess players who are really looking at a move versus a counter move, but have lost sight of the original objectives behind the negotiations. And I find it a bit bothersome that, for instance, in the conference of the parties that we have held a dozen and a half of almost, we seldom spend time talking about the original or the scientific reasons for us to take action on climate change. We just get bogged down through 2 weeks of intense negotiations on seeing what country A has drafted and what country wants, A, B wants, and so on. And I would like to submit that the time has come for us to see that knowledge becomes the major driver of actions that we are going to take at the global level. And Dr. Steiner also referred to Gandhi. I really think that Gandhi was deeply influenced by Rousseau and several of the other writers who sort of aroused the moral conscience at a time when perhaps it was in a state of limbo. And therefore I would say that today also represents something like Gandhi plus 100, because he said these things almost 100 years ago. What's also interesting is that here he was a lawyer who became an ascetic, but what he said has profound implications for economic policy and the inclusion of ecological considerations in the formulation of economic policy. The other person who I believe also said something extremely profound and far-reaching was a biologist called Garrett Hardin, who in 1968 talked about the tragedy of the commons. And I think this is what should be one of our major areas of concern, the manner in which we are using the global commons. Dr. Ignacy Sachs rightly talked about imposing a tax, which perhaps the global community should look at very seriously for the use of the global commons, because it's everybody's, what should I say, inheritance. And yet it seems to be nobody's possession. So we plunder it, we overuse it to the extent that perhaps we have now reached a point where we need to work much faster and perhaps expend much larger resources to solve the problem than if we had done so maybe 20 or 25 years ago. So we need to not only use knowledge, but also shed the illusion of knowledge, what we think of knowledge. And here I'd like to quote something that John Maynard Keynes said. He said the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. And I think that's as much a challenge as finding the means by which we can bridge the gap between knowledge and its application. I personally believe that there is really not an adequate emphasis provided to the whole issue of risk management. After all, human society is facing risks. The spread of poverty is one type of risk, but we are exacerbating that condition by imposing, let's say, the impacts of climate change that are going to make it almost impossible for poor people to be able to lift themselves out of the condition that they are in. So I think we really need to pay attention to the whole objective of risk management in development policy. And in this context, I would like to say that the IPCC has brought out 2 special reports in the last year, which have particular relevance to what I'm talking about. One of them deals with extreme events and disasters, and the other deals with renewable energy sources and climate change mitigation. So on the one hand, we are talking about the impacts of climate change, which represent a major threat for human society and all living species. And on the other, we are looking at means, mention was made earlier about bringing about a transition away from fossil fuels. Well, as it happens, renewable energy technologies today are one part of the solution that should be implemented with a sense of urgency. But if we look at minimizing risks, then we're really talking about the use of incremental steps versus transformational changes. And the question we should ask is, in specific conditions, are small incremental steps enough, or do we need to bring about transformational changes? Because it is entirely possible that with extreme climate and weather events, we may find it very difficult for systems to adapt sustainably without transformational changes. So I think this is an issue that we have to build into our development policies. And therefore, we must also create the conditions by which societies are resilient. Because there will be risks, there will be disasters, and of course, through mitigation of emissions of greenhouse gases, we have to contain them, we have to limit them, but we really don't have a choice other than to adapt to some impacts that are now inevitable. And societies will have to build in this extremely important notion of resilience in our development policies. The degradation of ecosystems are also a cause for concern because these provide essential services, and if these services are affected, then we are limiting the options for future risk management. And of course, in all this, learning processes are extremely crucial because unless we use knowledge, we might be doing things which are ineffective or much too expensive. So what I'm saying is that we need an interactive set of policies that involve adaptation, mitigation, as well as sustainable development. And the 3 are linked together. You can't do one without the other 2. And here I come to the final part that I would like to emphasize. Even though we really haven't, as many would question, not spent enough on research and development as far as renewable energy technologies are concerned, today their costs have come down significantly. So much so that in several applications, these technologies are now competing with conventional forms of energy supply. And you see examples of this all over the world. Now, my own institute in India has launched a major program called Lighting a Billion Lives because all of us should find it totally intolerable that in this day and age, in the year 2012, we really have 1.3 to 1.4 billion people who have no access to electricity. And if we go the conventional route, perhaps 3 more generations will go by without any benefits of electricity being connected to their homes. So what we've developed is a set of solar lanterns that are low cost, that are very light in weight, and use LED systems. And we train a woman in a village to charge all these solar lanterns during the daytime using a solar panel on the roof, and she rents them out at night to all the villagers, gets them back in the morning. And this is a very market-friendly model. But we're essentially taking technology for lighting After all, what is electricity required for? It's required for the end uses by which the human condition can be enhanced. And if we can use technology in a way that is socially and market-wise acceptable, then we are really bringing about the application of knowledge which otherwise would remain totally beyond the reach of people who are totally dispossessed. The last point I want to make is that all of this will happen only if we adopt the right set of policies. And policies necessarily will have to be forward-looking, will have to be comprehensive and broad in their sweep so that it benefits those who are otherwise left out of the system. And here, may I say, in this special report, we have assessed 164 different scenarios of how renewable energy can take the share of energy supply by 2050. And you would be surprised that the range is very vast, from 11% of the total energy supply in 2050 from renewable energy sources to 77%. Now, why is there this huge space? Well, simply because this is going to be dependent on the policies that we adopt, not in 2040, but that we